budget deficit. And this shows the Fed's balance sheet. In other words, how much paper money the Fed has created. They have increased the amount of paper money from less than 1 trillion now to 3 trillion. And they've just told us 2 weeks ago that they intend to increase the amount of paper money every month by $40 billion a month until it works. So multiply that times 12, that's 500 billion a year. And they've already told us that they will do more and probably will do more before too many more months pass. And ECB has said we will do whatever it takes. So in other words, they're going to do whatever it takes for as long as it takes. The problem is it's just not certain that it will work, because the fundamental problem remains that the income of the people is insufficient to service the interest on the debt. That's not going to change because of this. Now, it's crucial to understand that all of this paper money creation and all of the credit creation that I've been describing, it would have led to extreme high rates of inflation, if not hyperinflation, long ago, except for one thing. Globalization has occurred, something completely separate. And because of globalization, it's no longer necessary to pay someone $200 a day in Michigan to build an automobile. You can now pay someone $5 a day in Chennai. So what this represents is a 95% drop in the marginal cost of labor. Nothing like this has occurred in history either. They say there are only 3 factors of production: land, labor, and capital. Well, the cost of labor, the marginal cost of hiring your next worker, has fallen 95%. This is extremely deflationary. That has offset the extremely inflationary pressures that would have come about as a result of all the credit creation and paper money creation that I've described. And this has created, these two things have completely offset each other, so that we have almost no inflation at the CPI level if you strip out food and energy. This has created a kind of nirvana world where our governments are capable of borrowing and spending trillions of dollars and financing it with paper money creation without causing inflation. This is a gift from God. Nothing like this has occurred before. So what we have to understand is that we have a different kind of economic system than we had before. This is not capitalism. Under capitalism, the government played no role. In our system, the US government spends 24% of GDP. Under capitalism, gold was money, and the government had nothing to do with it. Under our system, the Fed creates the money and manipulates its value. Under capitalism, the economic growth dynamic was driven by businessmen who would invest, and some of them would make a profit. They would save that profit, or in other words, accumulate capital, hence capitalism, and repeat. Investment, savings, investment, savings. That was the growth dynamic under capitalism. It was slow and difficult. That's not the way our system works at all. For decades, our growth dynamic has been driven by credit creation and consumption, and credit creation and consumption, and that has created remarkably rapid global economic growth. I call this system creditism instead of capitalism, because it's driven by credit creation instead of capital formation. The problem is that now it looks like creditism can't grow anymore and may indeed collapse into a depression because the private sector can't repay the debt that it has already. But there are opportunities. We can now all see the flaws within creditism. The credit's blowing up. Something obviously has gone very badly wrong. But we're overlooking the flaws that exist within this new economic system of ours. And the opportunities are this. When big bubbles pop, like in Japan in the 1980s, interest rates fall, inflation falls. No one wants to borrow any money because there's no place to invest money. So interest rates fall to very low levels. That's what we've seen in Japan. Japan government bond yields, 10-year bond yields, 0.8%. That's how much they cost to borrow for 10 years. US government bond yields, UK government bond yields, German government bond yields. We have had a collapse in the cost of borrowing for our government. So here's the opportunity. We need to learn from Japan's mistakes. When Japan's bubble popped 22 years ago, if they had known that their crisis was going to go on for a quarter of a century and that they were going to spend trillions and trillions of dollars, they wouldn't have spent the money the way they did. They would have come up with a brilliant industrial policy on how to spend trillions of dollars instead of wasting the money building bridges to nowhere and paving the Japanese countryside with cement. So that's what we now have to learn. Our crisis is not going to go away in the next year or two. This is going to be a long-lasting, multi-decade crisis, and our governments are going to spend trillions of dollars, and our government debt levels are going to go higher and higher. So we have really three options. We can do what the American Tea Party wants, which is for us to immediately balance the government's budget deficit. In other words, for the government to spend $1 trillion less. Well, that would immediately result in economic collapse. The government spends $1 trillion less, 10 million people lose their jobs, business profits disappear, so business investment stops. It's a replay of the Great Depression. That's option number one. That's the worst possible option. That's the death today option. Option number two is the Japan model, to continue spending money wastefully for the next 20 years until eventually, I think the US can continue doing this for the next 5 years with no problem, maybe 10 years. But in about 10 years, the US government is going to be as bankrupt as Greece. And then we're going to collapse into a new depression. So that's option number two, follow the Japan model. Option number two is far, far better than option number one. It's far better to die in 10 years than to die today. So it's a much better idea to kick the can down the road as far as possible. But there's a better solution, and that's option number three. Option number three is to understand the nature of our crisis, to understand that that we are on government life support, and that the governments are going to spend this money. It's just a matter of how they spend it. So we need to come up with a very clever plan on how to spend trillions of dollars over the next 10 years. And what I would like to see is for the US government to, over the next 10 years, spend $1 trillion on solar energy, $1 trillion in genetic engineering, $1 trillion in biotechnology, and $1 trillion in nanotechnology. If they do, that will fundamentally restructure the US economy and give it an absolutely unassailable lead in 21st century technologies. For instance, if the US spends $1 trillion in solar, and I'm not talking about investing in solar panel companies. What I have in mind is carpeting Nevada with hundreds of thousands of American-made solar panels and building a grid coast to coast to transmit it on, and building batteries that make cars go 70 miles an hour for a very long time, and changing all the cars from being gasoline burning to being electric burning. Then in 10 years from now, we have free, eternal, limitless energy, which the government can tax for the next 10,000 years, using that money to pay for Medicare. And if the government spends $1 trillion on genetic engineering and biotechnology, then very likely 10 years from now they will have medical miracles like a cancer vaccine, or even a molecular therapy that reverses aging. Now, once the government starts selling a cancer vaccine, not only do they balance that year's budget deficit, it doesn't take long to pay off the entire national debt. So if we understand the nature of this crisis and the opportunity we have to borrow trillions of dollars at 1.7% interest, if we come up with a clever plan as a democratic society on how to spend this money, we don't have to collapse into a new depression. We don't have to die today in 10 years. Option three is the never die option. And this is what I advocate in my book. So we have a new kind of economic system. We can see its flaws. We just now need to learn how to make it work for us. If we do and invest this money on a very aggressive scale, then we can induce a new technological revolution that will not only prevent the new depression, but actually improve the well-being of every person on this planet. So that's what I'm in favor of. Thank you. Thank you.
I was getting seriously depressed just before the end there. Thank you for lifting our spirits. We have very little time. Does anyone have a question before Richard goes? Or did he answer all your questions in the last 5 minutes of his presentation? I guess not.
The question normally is, you must be insane. You can't think the government can do anything right. And the answer is, I disagree entirely. First of all, because the US government invests more in the US military than the rest of the world combined, the United States has global military dominance. So it's time to apply this very successful government investment strategy into American industry and into American power generation. And if we do, we'll have global dominance in those fields as well. So the government can do things right.